Traditional psychology based off of Freud is if you somehow alleviate all your suffering, then you will be happy.
Yeah.
Right? But that's really looking at the past and trying to evaluate and discard certain things of a past rather than just simply letting the future draw you towards it and to say, okay, you can't necessarily quantify happiness. Why don't we get them to be more resilient mentally?
Hey everybody, welcome to Unbreakable Radio, episode 4. I'm super excited to have my friend Jason Willits on the show today. Jason was a paratrooper and has one of the first groups in the military to go through resiliency training that was developed in 2008. Is that correct?
It was developed in 2008. I went through it in 2011, 2012.
Rock on. So one of the first cohorts to experience that. He talks a lot about the ego and has a lot of really interesting ideas and knowledge on mindset and mental approach to resiliency. So we're just here to talk about some of that stuff. How you doing, Jason?
I'm doing well. It's beautiful out here now, finally. Little cold snap, no big deal now.
Yeah, we got like a 60-degree jump from negative 11 to 50. Everybody's in like shorts and nobody's in jackets. It's nice.
So get done with this and go grill or something. So I think the way in which the Master Resiliency Training kind of came about, with which the University of Pennsylvania to put together this program at the request of General Casey, the commander of the Army. Okay, he said, "How are we going to address soldier and veteran suicide? Soldier suicide primarily. 22 a day. Soldiers, veterans kill themselves, and so." This sort of emerging movement had come about. Prior to that, Martin Siegelman is the kind of the creator of what's called positive psychology. And so rather than focusing on the classical model of psychology was developed by Freud. If these things happen to you and you remove the bad, then you're going to be happy, was the assumption. And so that's kind of the classical idea. What University of Pennsylvania and particularly Dr. Siegelman kind of said, no, let's focus instead on well-being. Let's focus instead on more of a holistic approach, something that can be measurable, something that you can actually almost quantify. You can't really quantify.
It's more realistic too, right? Because the idea that you remove all the negative experiences or bad variables is like, what? Life doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like we can't say like, I'm going to just stop having bad things happen to me and then I'll be happy.
I would agree with that. And so when I went through this training, it blew my mind. It was one of those things where I couldn't believe how effective it was, quite frankly. And then as a Master Resiliency Trainer, then I was tasked with putting it on the training calendar and walking my entire special operations company through this. And myself and one other charismatic individual pretty much did the whole thing for years. And I was amazed at how receptive soldiers were to this. Usually when you hear about mandatory training.
Sure. Just like pushback, right? Like, I don't need that.
Especially from young soldiers. You'd expect that. But the way in which this presents, I don't think I've come across anybody that's had this presented correctly that hasn't gotten anything out of it.
Rejected it, sure.
And it even mentions in his book going to in Melbourne, Australia, they had those rich kid schools are.
Oh, like a boarding school?
Yeah, boarding school.
Yeah.
There we go. And the dean of the boarding school heard about this, and he was very much, an Englishman all the way. And,
yes.
Was just almost cold with regards to this. And within, I want to say it was like after the first discussion, the first experience of tasting this and seeing what it was like, he was like, "Dude, let's make this whole thing. Like, this is So he really got on board. So it really, the main focus of the entirety, it really is just how to shift your perspective in a way. So give me an example of a recent event that what we would call an activating event.
Sure. And
the fallout from it, or it can be good or bad, but so give me an example.
Yeah,
recently.
Activating
event and the consequence.
Yeah, well, I think a personal activating event would be like my hip infection last year, right? Or like collectively we've got the COVID-19 pandemic, and those are both, right? They're both like distressing and immediately feel like threatening, emotionally, but also physically, right? So does that kind of qualify?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
So what is the consequence of that activating event?
I think for my hip infection, the consequences, you've got immediate physical pain, right? You've got sustained suffering, and then kind of like there's also this anxiety component of the unknown. And I think then, as well with the pandemic, that's a collective thing is true, right? Is like we are watching other people suffer, and then maybe there's like survivor guilt for those of us that like haven't suffered. And then, likewise, right? This anxiety of like, well, I haven't suffered yet, but am I going to suffer? So there's like an anticipation of suffering as well that's kind of like on the back burner at all times, or ever present, regardless of if you're enjoying something at the moment, there's like, oh, there'll be backlash from this later or something, I think, right?
So how much of the event itself caused the consequence?
Not that much, right?
I don't know.
I mean, depending, I think probably depending on the circumstance. So I think there are certain things with immediately physical injury, then there is like, of course, the injury itself is causing maybe like pain, but a lot of it's the anticipation, like it's the psychological component of anticipation or anxiety or regret or guilt, or like these novel concepts that they're intangibles and they're individualized, right? Their variability to them on a person-to-person basis.
So that really is one of the key skills that resiliency tries to teach soldiers, that whatever any activating event is, and the consequence, there is
like a margin.
Your thoughts, your reaction, your emotion, and that you can control. Right. You can't control the consequence, you can't control the activating event, but you can definitely control that internal margin.
Sure.
I can remember, this is years before I ever touched on MRT, but I can recall the very first maybe significant time that I was in danger in Iraq. It wasn't the first time I was in danger, but I can recall there was one time that so I was a truck driver. We did more combat mileage than any other truck company throughout the entire Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Wow.
Until the very end, and then another company beat us by like 20 miles. And we're like, just bull crap.
Yeah.
Just no.
Yeah.
And so whipped it.
Like we've done it the whole time.
And we didn't have up armor when I was first there, and so.
True, that when it kind of like started, right? When this was all maybe like
they actually,
but
the
like
reason,
the development was not as much.
The reason that we had so many more mileage is because they grounded us. They grounded all the Iraqi convoys, because what happened was Donald Rumsfeld was put on the spot by a specialist who had a question planted in his mouth by a reporter who actually bumped into me when the story broke, and I watched him get fired, essentially.
Wow.
He's a rude. Didn't like the guy anyway. So, but he had basically said, because it became a national thing from the Secretary of Defense on why are we driving around without actual like armor.
Right. Yeah, we're just cruising.
We're just getting blown up.
Yeah.
They grounded all the Iraqi convoys.
Wow.
But because we were an echelon above corps unit, basically running straight from the seaport to wherever, we were a Kuwaiti.
Oh, sure.
Technically Kuwaiti
yeah, you
based,
fall outside the margin.
So we can kind of
the order.
So we got twice as much work, because now we have to take up all the extra.
The slack that's not being done by these others that have been grounded. Sure.
So at one point, I can remember we were pulling into a small Marine base, and I was training a individual with the last name of Bean Blossom, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like
Bean Blossom's
Bean
got
Blossom.
my back.
I was like, oh gosh. So she and I were training. We had another individual that kind of decided, good idea, Ferry. I want to be in charge. So it totally shifted the flow, the natural flow that our entire squad had always had.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't get to eat because the chow got messed up for who was going to go get it and snagged. We pulled into this camp, and like right away it was turn off your headlights, because every time there's a convoy that comes in here with their headlights on, they get mortared. So we don't want you to get mortared.
Sure.
Turn off your headlights. Okay. So we drive in, and it was raining. It was during the wet season. So like early, I don't know, like February time frame, probably about this time frame. It would have been 2005. And the option was, okay, you can go sleep in the tent. Well, the tent's got holes in it for mortars. Like, it's raining.
It's not
like,
super comforting. Yeah, it's not comforting at all. Right.
I don't want to sleep here. Why? It's just going to get wet. So you sleep in your cab. So I probably got about 2 hours of sleep, and this is in the last 24.
What type of vehicle are we in at this
semi
point?
truck.
Okay.
Semi. Okay. So and of course it's all muddy, so all our trucks are getting stuck, and so it's you think about all the things in which you can be mortally in danger and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And as a 22, 23-year-old kid, I was.
Wow.
You can imagine that I'd probably be in a bad mood.
Yeah.
And I can remember. As we were finally leaving the base and hoping that we'd maybe get to catch some hot chow, I can remember the rain was falling in this mud puddle, and little black, it almost looked like a negative image of what you see in like a football stadium, when all the flashes going on.
Sure.
You know
Yeah,
what I
like
mean?
a reverse version.
But it was black.
Okay.
Black little flashes from the mud.
Yeah.
From the rain.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like if I weren't exhausted, I probably would have overlooked that. If I weren't hungry, I wouldn't,
I'm not like looking at this like muddy rain puddle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is cool. It's neat to be able to experience that. And so I think that's kind of what MRT attempts to really establish. I just did it the old-fashioned way through meditation, breath exercise, a stillness of interiority that allowed me to shift my focus.
Well, and it sounds like instead of maybe labeling these things as negative, they just become like interesting, observable experiences.
Right. So you're a creature, right? Created by the universe or created by a deity, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
But you are a creature, okay? As a creature, you get that breath. That's a gift. You get to take another one. That's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So who are you to try to determine or assume anything outside of that gift of a breath in a way?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's straight from the book of Job. One of the oldest books chronologically written in the Bible, they assume. Who are you? You're a creature. You're given that breath. So something that I had always admired the resilience of the Buddhist monk that set himself on fire to protest the Vietnam War.
Yeah, yep, I've seen that video. Yeah.
Right? Absolutely still. Absolutely, calm, peaceful meditation.
The whole time, yeah. Yeah.
So I try to always. My goal is, that would be the worst way I can think of to die. Burning
Yeah.
away.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
It's God. It looks god awful, but it's impressive is probably the wrong word, but it is kind of impressive to watch because it's like he's.
How many people have burned alive? As statistically, percentage-wise, of all the human race, you're talking a pretty small percentage, possibly.
Yeah. Okay? Most of us don't burn to death.
Most of us don't burn to death.
Yeah.
Thankfully. There's a few times that it got kind of close, so while I was deployed. But I did make the mistake of making fun of one of my fellow soldiers at one point because he essentially gave up, thought he was going to burn to death, and just sat there, and then had forgot that there was another door that he could get out from. He wasn't too pleased.
You're like, this doesn't have to happen. You can leave.
Right? You can just so. But if I were burning alive, I would like to believe that I would be able to maintain enough awareness and stillness, and even in that moment to recognize that I'm being given the gift of all of my synapses being
experiencing an interesting, observable moment. Holy shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That very few have ever been able to experience.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're ever going to be able to,
You don't do it twice.
You don't do it twice. It won't last very long.
Yeah.
Breathe, experience, soak it in. And I think that has sort of been the mental framework by which I've been able to go through the things that I've been able to go through, and mentally, emotionally, cognitively heal afterwards, or become
not be fully ridden by suffering forever afterwards,
or dragging it with me as if it were the one and only suffering I think that we as egos far too often define ourselves based off of our suffering compared to others' suffering.
Yeah.
In a form of attention addiction.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah. It becomes like oppression Olympics, like suffering Olympics.
Right. So, I was speaking with a pastor, part of the ECM book club that I'm part of here in town. Came over and chatted with coffee, and he had mentioned that he had PTSD, and it was almost sad. He immediately said, "I have been diagnosed with PTSD. I have anxiety in certain situations, but it's nothing like yours." He almost immediately
you feel guilty, like, your comparison, right?
And I was like, dude, no, like
what you experience is not. It's relative. Like you're all, it's all valid. Yeah,
precisely. You can, whatever you've gone through that causes you to have anxiety is something that you've gone through that causes you to have anxiety.
Yeah.
So that what we call PIP, put it in perspective, is probably one of the main core things. But then we also break down icebergs. What are some of the core thoughts and beliefs that you carry with you throughout the day, throughout your life, that can cause you to have specific judgments, assumptions. One of my favorite modules to teach was Hunt the Good Stuff.
Yeah.
Every night, you have to speak about 3 great things that happened today.
Yeah,
Write
absolutely.
them down.
Yeah, like a gratitude journal.
That's exactly right. It's a gratitude journal. That's exactly.
I don't want to sidetrack us, but is this something that you came to like as a 23-year-old after this resiliency training, or is this like, have you always wanted to be able to be still while you were burned alive? You know what I mean? Like, how did you get this way?
The stillness,
training aside.
The stillness while burning alive and wishing to do that was a direct result of recognizing growth in meditation. I had been given a 20-breath Sufi initiate meditation prior to my first deployment, which I walked through in a YouTube video that we can link on.
Watch that. Yeah, we'll put it in the link.
So it's just a 20-breath, extremely thorough, but it's like their kindergarten meditation. But it's so thorough and so quick. 20 breaths.
If it's not broke, why fix it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's what, a minute and a half, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
So my first deployment, I just made it a point every day after I'd work out, go to the gym. I'd sit in the corner back over here with a whole bunch of soldiers working out all over, and I'm the weirdo that's meditating,
Yeah.
I just did that every day. Did that 20 breath meditation, and the more mastery over thought, the more, I would say, recognition of the times where even when you're trying that stillness, your brain's derailing. Like, you're not even doing this right. You know what I mean?
Like your head's not empty. You can't meditate. You're too dumb to meditate.
Your head's not empty enough yet. Like, it would be if you get out of there. And so that, I think, I think it was probably putting that in practice for about 4 to 6 months daily. Which
takes like a something already, right? Like...
Yeah, I mean, I was just interested in, I was like, well, I wonder what this whole meditation thing's all about. You know what I mean?
Like curiosity is like a key component of like why you started and adhered. Yeah.
And if I'm going to die tomorrow, I might as well get as far as I can figuring these stuff out.
Yeah.
I mean, that was...
Get it in now.
That was, my first tour, that was the driving force was, if I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm going to catch up on all the things that I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So I read quantum physics, I'd read the history of religion, I'd read, everything I was curious about. And that became my addiction to nonfiction.
Yeah.
Here we are, 15 years later, and I've got a library full of books that I just have nerded over, to include Now Flourish. Now, my brother gave this to me. I didn't even know it, but he read it. He's a guidance counselor in high school up in Northern Iowa, and he had read it. And over Christmas, he's like, "Hey, you should read this." I was like, "Oh yeah?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's this thing." And I said, "Well, that sounds a little bit like Master Resiliency Training." He said, "This is the guy that created that."
You're like, "Oh, yeah, I know that guy."
In that case, yes, I will definitely read it.
Yeah.
So that was neat. And then my second tour is really where that concept of the ego, that concept of the I, really, I think, was shattered.
Sure.
By Douglas Hofstadter. He wrote a book called I Am a Strange Loop.
Yes.
And I've actually, you've read that?
I've read it, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what I thought. And his perspective on the I honestly, I think at least I had it before I pulled out that piece of paper, but the one image that he uses of the I that then becomes really, maybe I'll find it and you can pull it up on your viewer, splice it in, where it's an I in the middle, and then it just gradually changes until all four corners it's not even recognizable. So his idea of us being a strange loop, a feedback,
like a refractory system.
Yeah. So we are only a feedback system. I found that very comforting.
Yeah.
Then the experiences themselves don't define me. I just absorb them and choose how
you pick your perspective, right? Yeah, I read a meditation book, and I'm going to butcher the name, so I'm not going to say it. But it was talking about how, like, clear mind is like the sky. Because I think, you suggest meditation to people, and they're like, well, I can't get my head to be empty. And it's like clear mind is like the sky, and that we don't, like, clouds come and go through it, and they might be like storm clouds or, cumulonimbus or whatever. Like, Laura knows all the cloud names. But those come and go, and you can observe them, that we don't associate them as something essentializing with, like, the sky behind it. Right, and so then it's this kind of concept of, like, clear mind here, and then thoughts come and enter and exit, and they're not essentializing to the thing underneath. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's in a culture. One of the things that Spielman brings up in this is that we have, since the Industrial Revolution, measured wealth. The only purpose to wealth, according to economists, is to create more wealth.
Yeah, so it's a self-begetting system.
And at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, GDP was a great way to measure kind of how a society went.
Yeah.
Now, it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So his suggestion actually is that we utilize the wealth to create well-being.
Interesting. Okay.
globally and really key in on, okay, we've got all of this wealth.
Yeah, it's pulled up for some people and then not for others.
Mm-hmm. So how do we utilize that to ensure that no matter where people are economically, they can still use this positive psychology approach to create well-being for themselves individually?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a really human-centric, I mean, it's not even at that point, is it an economic theory, or is it just like a human-centered philosophy?
Right.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, completely. Yeah. And so he opens and closes his book with, what's the purpose of all of this wealth? Economists
to grow
would say,
itself like
right,
a weed
economists
or
would
almost
say,
like a disease.
And unfortunately, in a consumer society where a quarter of our annual GDP is based completely on consumption, we are inundated by everything that tells us that we need to be attached to our emotion. Buy, get angry,
well,
allow
and
yourself
advertising
to feel
is predatory on those things,
Very
right?
much.
It's like we prey on insecurity to say, well, you look old, well, buy this face cream so you won't
exactly
look old, and then you'll have value because you'll be young looking again, and then you get these things like ageism, or like we assign value arbitrarily for the benefit of these companies that leverage our insecurities for wealth production.
Very much so. So I doubt that wholeness and well-being are really going to take off. It's like the next big thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, mindfulness is the trendy thing. So I mean, that's a form of meditative perspective on, as you said, clear mind, and allowing yourself to be so present. I think that's really what I gained more than anything from my time in Iraq, my time in Afghanistan. The ability that if you breathe, if you meditate, if you pray, I've got some prayers that I've memorized that I just love throughout the day. It's 9, noon, 3 p.m., morning, evening.
Sure.
No matter what I'm doing, I can just center myself.
Bring like presence back.
Very much.
I remember reading, it may have been in one of David Hofstadter's book, but it was this like brain scan study that they'd done on like master meditators and then on like Catholic nuns. And there was one other category, but it was, kind of like secular, spiritual, like religious spirituality, and then like fully secular. But they were all mindfulness practices. And when they were measuring the brain, like there were moments where what Catholic nuns labeled as being like in communion with God, like during like intense Catholic prayer, it mirrored the same brain scan as these like Buddhist monks that were meditating, which mirrored, there was a control group that was using, I think psilocybin, which is the psychoactive component in psychedelic mushrooms. And that they all turned the part of the brain that creates the sense of self and the amygdala, which creates that like fight or flight response. It was like the volume was turned down in terms of electrical activity, and the volume, the part of our brain that makes us feel connected, or that feeling of like oneness, the volume was turned up. And it didn't really matter if they were Catholic or Buddhist or taking these drugs that kind of maybe fast tracked these states, or if they were just meditating. That all of them had a similar neurochemical effect.
And if you are simply a creature that, one of my videos, I'm going to map it out, but that stillness, there's two concepts of time in Greek: Kairos and Chronos. We're accustomed to Chronos.
Right.
It's linear.
Chronological, right? Greek origin, sure.
Linear, it's what we associate with time. But Kairos is now. When is it ever not now?
It's chronically unfolding.
Always. You can ask your viewer, when has it ever been not now for any of you? I'm almost 40,
It's never
and I can't think of a time that it was not now.
Yeah.
So that chirological focus is
Yeah.
what we attempt in our Orthodox Christian practices,
Mhm.
in our prayer, so it's no wonder that the nuns had the same thing, but that chirological always now
Mhm.
is God,
Sure.
according to
These tenets.
some of the earliest saints, that we allow our brains, our thoughts, our emotions, all of those things are chronological. All
Sure.
those things are created.
Mhm.
They enter into time.
Through labeling too, to a certain extent, we label
Exactly.
things that have happened and label things that will happen,
Yep.
and then we put them on
Yep.
a spectrum and say, oh look, there's was then and there was now
Mhm.
and now there's now. Yeah,
But-
and is that where, like you said, saints refer to this in like
Mhm.
early literature? Is that where maybe like there's a fellow that talks a lot about meditation that's also like a Catholic mystic, and I know that like part of the church. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know a lot. Is it Robert Rohr? Richard Rohr? Rohr is his last name,
No, I'm
but
not
he talks
familiar.
about that same concept.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So for the Jews, you had this annual passage, right? They had this, and a lot of cultures they had an agricultural cycle,
Yeah, right.
but that tied everyone together to this communal.
Mhm.
Time was chronological because it passed through seasons, but it was still chirological because it was
It's always now.
only this season, and it tied everybody together. And so often I think that Christians miss out if they read some of the old Greek or they understand the concepts. The time is coming and is now is a repetitive statement that Jesus makes. Paul often says in, I believe it's Galatians, it is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. This idea of the ego that you identify with too easily, that is actually a false construct that you've created,
Yeah, the resignation of the I.
falls away.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I become chirological part of that stillness,
Mm-hmm.
that eternal stillness. The really cool thing is that David Bohm's quantum physicist,
Mm-hmm.
The max Planck length, which is the smallest possible size that anything can become real,
Sure.
manifest,
Right.
okay, in the quantum world,
Yeah.
smallest possible size. David Bohm says there's actually a mathematical size that is proven, but infinitely more saturated. I mean, tinier.
Yeah.
Like,
Saturated with tininess.
everything
Yeah.
is saturated with tininess. The Greeks had a concept of eternity that was it was Zeno's paradoxes.
Mm-hmm.
You're familiar
Yes.
with that?
Yeah.
How does the if I shoot an arrow at a target, how does the arrow hit the target? Well, chronologically, it goes hits the target. Zeno
Mhm.
says, well, yeah, but in order to get to that target, it has to cross the halfway point. And in order to get to that
Mhm.
halfway point, it's got to cross the halfway point of that.
There's another, is it Archimedes and the Hare or
Mhm,
something?
mhm.
There's the,
Yep.
and it's in David
Yep.
Hofstadter's other book, which is the Gödelischer
Gödelischer
Bach in
and Bach.
Infinite Strange Loop or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and
An eternal golden
idea.
thread. Yeah.
Yes. So the same idea. We too often, I think of eternity as some chronological
It
push.
happens forever.
chronological.
Yeah.
No, it's chirological now,
Mhm.
always.
Which seems like if you look at, like, you mentioned being like Christian Orthodox, but you look at all these global religions, and like the oldest ones seem to all, like, it doesn't matter if you're naming it Christianity or
Yep.
you're naming it Buddhism, or
Buddhism,
you're naming
yep.
it like whatever it is, Hinduism or
Yep.
Islam. It's
just a simple, different approach. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at even the name of God in Exodus, Moses. I am that which I am, Yahweh.
Mhm.
Or it can also be translated as I am that which I am becoming.
which is like the ever unfolding
It's
present moment.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So the Tao, you're right.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so tapping into that, practicing it through meditation, to putting into practice meditation for long enough that you can allow your brain to say you're not doing it right, without it causing you emotionally to.
Mhm.
You were talking about that basically the brain to body resonance.
Mhm.
I have, as a part of my, I said, last season of trauma that I have gone through, was invited through the VA to participate in something like that, meditate while watching the feedback, the biofeedback.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, sure. I've heard about that.
The first time I did it was actually when I got back from Afghanistan, and we were starting to talk about master resiliency training. And this guy was like,
hey, let's put it on the special forces guy. We'll see how he does.
We'll try it out on him. Let's try it out on the guy with a lot of trauma. Let's use him as our test dummy. You're like, yeah, cool, I'm traumatized. Thank you.
The funny thing was, they hooked it up. They turned off the screen.
Yeah.
Hooked it up, let it go for a little while. And I'd been meditating.
They were banking on you being like a
master.
master.
They had no idea that I'd been
already. Yeah.
I'd been meditating for decades at the time, you know.
Screw.
So they did. They turned it on, and it was dead on in line with like, and even the instructor, the person that was doing it was like, what? Like that wasn't supposed to happen. You know?
Yeah, they're like, this is an outlier. This data's not useful. It's
Wait
not useful
a minute
data.
here. No. So
I'm gonna make sure we're still.
To have done that, what was I think really interesting when I did that for a while, I actually had moments where it was strong images. They were repetitive. They were the same series. I don't remember what they were, but it was followed by this massive amount of like pain, crunch in my body. And it would happen either when I was laying down, attempting to sleep, showering.
It's intrusive, it sounds like.
It was.
Yeah.
It was completely.
Yeah.
But and it probably once a week for maybe a month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, I had never experienced anything like that.
Yeah. Intrusive and uncontrollable and feels real, which is like what's realness, right? But that it feels like it's maybe happening in the moment.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was whatever my brain needed to do to heal from
like
the trauma.
Reprocess maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's something that we talk about, like, not to talk too much about weightlifting, but people come in with chronic pain conditions, or they've had injury history in the past, and they're like, well, there's something wrong with my knee or whatever. We insert body part here, and I'm like, okay, well, do you have an MRI? What was your recent MRI? Well, it's totally healed. It looks normal. Well, it's because pain doesn't, inflammation or injury or whatever exists in the tissue. But the pain doesn't exist in the tissue. The pain exists in the brain, which is why you can have like a limb amputated and still be like, my hand hurts, and it's like, well, you don't have a hand. Exactly. And it's because the pain is being created. It's a neurological process and construct, not like a physiological reality.
Something that blew my mind. I was invited to participate at K-State with a eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
I just did some of this with a therapist. Yeah, it's incredible.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's nuts.
Did you do the tap, or did you do
it was
lights?
It was like hand buzzers. Yeah,
okay.
And then you try to explain it to people, and you're like, yeah, it's really amazing, and it's really healing, and it like vibrates in your hands over and over again, and they're like, okay, that sounds super strange. Yeah.
I just found out KU Med, for all of you out there, KU Med evidently is doing they're asking for volunteers for a study for this, and it's the light one, and that's the one I did.
Yeah, cool, okay.
So the reason that happens, I've also, The Body Keeps Score.
I recommend that book to a lot of people.
Such a great book. But that really helped me. That and Becoming Supernatural by Joe DeSesma, maybe?
Oh, I've heard of that book title, but I've not read it myself.
Those two combined really helped me to understand physiological process between brain and body, and how much of us is actually body. We're locked in this little thing here, and assuming that this is somehow us, but no. It's, but that EMDR, evidently the images or the memory itself of a traumatic event is locked in, I think, front right hemisphere. The sensory, tactile, smell, taste, back left.
Oh, interesting.
So I believe.
Sure.
But so that's the reason why if you go through trauma, and you go through and you have a PTSD type symptom afterwards, that traumatic experience can be so intrusive.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much you talk about the memory, no matter how much you
it's living,
try to process
and
it,
these aren't
it's still
talking.
Exactly. Those two aren't talking. So EMDR allows the two hemispheres to process it out.
Well, and that's fascinating because I think, like, you know, with my crush injury, like, obviously, you know, people get blown up or get in car accidents or whatever. There's like, it's a common, although it's not maybe common to have a tree fall on you, it's a common type of experience, which is like, it's alarming, it's sudden, it's, you know, pressure, bone breaking, whatever, severe injury, like, oh, I might die. All the common things with an uncommon experience. But that, you know, people ask about that. And I've done a lot of like verbal recounting of it, and it means nothing emotionally. You're like, yeah, this happened, it fell on me. It went crunch, I heard it, went smush. But you're never re-experiencing it when you're verbalizing it. It's just like, yeah, this is a thing that happened, and these are all the events as they are like factual. And I had never really, I felt kind of like I'd maybe gotten away kind of like reasonably unscathed by PTSD for the most part, at least maybe like an anxiety here and there, but not startled in the night or, you know, the things that you might tie in with the original accident as like, you know, feeling jumpy or something. And then, like, I've had this upcoming surgery on the horizon, and I've only had emergency surgery. I've never had planned surgery. And this experience of anticipating going to the hospital, and then, like, we've been opening this new gym location where, like, stress. And I had an anxiety attack out of nowhere that was related. In my original accident, my sciatic nerve on the right side was crushed, and so my leg went numb. And we were sitting on the couch watching TV. My right leg went numb, and my brain ran with the physiological experience of it. And all of a sudden, it was like, I could not tell if I was in the hospital, going into surgery again, thinking about being in a kitchen, because I like went into our kitchen to try to like, or if I was in the kitchen, just having like a flashback anxiety attack episode. And that was the first time that I felt like those two things had like linked, which is part of why I'm seeking out the EMDR training. And then that was really incredible because it was like for the first time, and it's hard to articulate unless you've experienced it, but it felt like for the first time, like, oh yeah, this and this are talking, and I'm not just verbally recounting, because verbally recounting feels like nothing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible.
Amazing,
yeah.
I can recall in Omaha, 4th of July, I was kind of living in a Midtown area, and I can remember driving past Omaha celebrates the 4th of July by lighting fireworks off on a golf course that's right next to the VA mental hospital.
Not funny, but it's
it's hilarious.
It's like perverse.
It is hilarious. No, those guys. So I can remember driving, and all of a sudden these flares are basically going off, and I had to slow down because there were some kids running across the street with their families.
Yeah.
And immediately it was the slow pace and the flashes, and all of a sudden I'm like,
your brain is like
right back in Iraq. It was so strange, and that was probably the most significant flashback I've ever had that wasn't dream related. I dream of war all the time.
Right.
And thanks to the EMDR, I can dream of war all the time. I don't wake up.
But you don't like.
It's not lingering. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not,
you're not thinking about it during the day or whatever, like playing by it after.
Right.
Yeah.
And it used to be forever. It was forever. For 15 years, every night, I would dream of war. I would wake up and I'd be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to have any adventures today. You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. That's
really,
like super depressing.
It really is. But I think it's very common for those who have gone through war, battle. You know, it's not. There is a stigma among veterans that say, I wish I was over there so that I could come back.
Does it, I was just about to ask, does it almost feel easier to be physically at war than it does to feel like...
Oh, completely. Everything falls away.
Yeah.
There's the immediacy of...
Because you're just at war, I'm dealing with it, I'm surviving.
It's the immediacy of, oh, this is what I need to do to survive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and nothing else matters, nothing else, no other stress, no other, you know.
It's got to be like a high in a way.
Oh, completely.
Like people ask me, they were like, what's it like to be crushed by a tree? And you're like, well, it's kind of like the most alive you ever feel for like about 15 minutes.
Right. There was a poet.
It's like best worst high ever.
Poet that I love that says, cars, hellish because of the debt they cause, are only worth it when you crash them into trees and call from the police station, happy with your life being something that you found.
Yeah. Whoa. Wow. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I've got that cross-stitched.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It's
like, Mom, can you cross-stitch this for me? She's like, oh,
yeah,
Jason,
sure.
Why do I have to? You know, you gotta love that woman. She's put up with hell. So yeah, I mean, I think there are proven techniques to become resilient. There are proven techniques to practice that centering that allows you to pause, recognize what you're in control of with regards to how you interpret an event, how you internalize an event, and that gives you the power to the active event. The consequence probably won't change, but the power of how you're going to interpret.
Yeah,
that.
you're not making the bad go away. You're just coping with it better.
Exactly.
Yeah. What are the steps, like when you take like a cohort of, you've got like a bunch of like 18-year-old kids fresh in the military, and you're taking them through the steps of resiliency training, and they've like, they've never heard of this before. Like, because this guy wants me to meditate. Some hippie stuff. Like,
and
how do you
it really
get people to accept that?
I don't. The meditation is not a part of MRT.
Okay.
Necessarily, energy management is.
Sure.
And so that is
like
a
an
form
adjacent
of.
thing.
It's like breathe. Close your eyes and breathe and recognize just how. Yeah.
Like tactile breath.
Right. So rhythmic breathing is a part of the energy management, but the steps themselves, just simply starting with goal setting. Okay.
Sure.
Pretty simple. Hunting the good stuff, like I said, like your positivity, gratitude journal. Yep. 3 times every day.
Okay.
Find 3 things every day that you can be thankful for every single day. Once that has become a habit, then your activating event, consequence, your thought pattern in between.
Sounds a lot like EMDR.
It does.
Yeah.
And that you can recognize that the themes of those thoughts, so loss, the emotion reaction of any sense of loss, potential loss, impending loss, you're going to have sadness and withdrawal.
Grief,
danger, you're going to have anxiety and agitation. Any thought of danger, any anticipation of danger, anything dangerous that actually happened. So those themes, you can then say, okay, how emotionally, in your gut right now, how are you feeling? And these 18-year-olds can say, well, I feel pissed. Okay.
Yeah.
Why? Well, I don't know. Well, could it be that anger is because of a sense of trespass?
You're helping them trace a line between event and feeling.
Exactly.
You're kind of holding their hands through it.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. So what would cause you to feel trespass? And they, he didn't do his part. He betrayed me. He whatever. Okay, well, that's why you're feeling angry. Can we maybe interpret what happened a little differently? Maybe that gentleman didn't necessarily intend to betray you.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes this team-building exercise as you go around the room. Then energy management, avoiding thinking traps, which is kind of getting into your thought themes. What are some of the ways in which you jump to conclusions or mind read?
Yeah.
Or me, or they, or
right, which posits us against one another as opposed to like being on, like we're all on the same team dealing with the problem as opposed to like you're the cause of the problem.
Yep, that's exactly right. And this is, I think, the thing that excites me the most about positive psychology in general is it's so much more of a team. One of the things that Spielman brings up in his book, he says, okay, if the selfish gene theory accounts for evolution, and statistically speaking, most people are happier when they don't have children. Why have we continued to have kids?
Yeah.
He says, I think the selfish gene theory that Richard Dawkins really made such a big deal of is incorrect. He would say that we are altruistic. We are meant to be social creatures.
Well, and there's evidence to show that like people, they say like if you want to live like a long life, like don't smoke, don't drink, don't whatever, but that one of the bigger factors even than like smoking, drinking, and getting your flu shot and exercising is community.
Yeah,
and social isolation. Social isolation is more murderous than these like negative health behaviors a lot of the time.
Yeah. So in that case, if we're social creatures, then it makes sense that you want to have children. You want to build a relationship with that family. You want to, one of the things I had read years ago with Richard Dawkins' selfish gene theory, that Paul Shepard, who was I want to say 1960s Yale biologist, would put to Richard Dawkins in A River Out of Eden says, there is no God. And the way that I know that is because I look at a cheetah and an ibex. And if there was a god that designed a cheetah, he designed it perfectly to kill ibex. And ibex are designed perfectly to evade cheetahs.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you either have no god, two gods, one for the ibex, one for the cheetah,
yeah.
or a god who likes blood sport.
Yeah, which is like a cruel god theory.
Right.
It's a very punishing, punitive type
and Paul Shepard would say, what taught the cheetah to stalk, camouflage? Its brain is slightly larger. What taught the cheetah to develop? The ibex. What taught the ibex to come together as a group? What kills off the sick, the infirm, the old, the starving before they starve?
Which keeps the ibex bloodline like genetically competitive.
The cheetah.
Yeah.
So even that is a social.
Yeah, it's a beneficial social relationship in some very peculiar way, as long as it's not out of balance in either direction.
Right.
It's like pruning a bush of its dead branches so it grows. Yeah.
So his and I tend to agree, and I have since I've read Paul Shepard, is this social that life itself it overcomes entropy through reciprocal altruism. It overcomes entropy through and specializes and does all the things that life is able to do through community.
Yeah. At like every level of
single level.
Right? Like we've got like bacteria or like fungus or yeast or to like a larger wow.
Exactly. I mean your microbiome, you've got more bacteria living in your gut than there's have ever been humans ever.
Yeah, which we're learning more and more about too, and it's effective. Like there's some stuff with like the gut and serotonin production and like psychiatric disorders or
There was a Discover magazine in November had a great article on treating autism and curing autism through fecal
gut bacteria. Yeah, interesting. Well, and they're finding also like there was a paper published in Science magazine on gut bacteria and the development of like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and like neurological.
Yep. 10% Human is a great book on the different autoimmune disorders and MS, and it makes sense that we have had a retired physician that was a client of mine back when I was a financial advisor. He said his wife had MS. He said it's so strange, when I first started practicing medicine, this is something that you would have to seek out somebody who had MS to make it a specialty, to study them intensively. It's just so rare. Now, it's so common. If it's related to our gut,
bacteriological
killing off the diversity of our gut through all the chemicals
like
inside of our food,
chemical,
all the preservatives, quite frankly, all the
things made to dampen bacteriological growth.
Exactly. Yeah. So our diversity of our own gut, even there, we have a need for a social diversity.
Yeah. Interesting.
So icebergs is after I walk them through the thinking traps, the icebergs. What are the deepest, how some things that you value as a human being that you say this is how the world should be. What are some of the things underneath all of that as to why you
are the
believe
shoulds
the world should be this? So walk them through that. Problem solving, pretty easy. Just step by step, how do we solve problems? And that's more of teach them how they are thinking.
Yeah.
Rather than
which
teach
people
them what
probably aren't aware of at all.
You assume it's automatic. That activating event, thought, consequence, the ATC model, every time I teach that, blows people away. It's hilarious to watch.
Yeah, how much of your life's like conducted by habit.
Right. You just assume that this activating event and this consequence were just rushed.
Of course
that happened. I got angry because of that person doing stupid things. Which, every time I'm in the grocery store, that's what happens. But the fact of the matter is there's your thoughts and your interpretation of those thoughts in between.
Yeah.
And you can control that. So putting it into perspective is a great way to reduce catastrophic thinking. My favorite way to do this is to do three different columns on a piece of paper.
Okay.
And it helps to have somebody else do this for you. But what's the worst thing that can happen? So give me a scenario. Okay, your upcoming surgery.
Oh, yeah. The worst thing that happens is that a surgeon that's done hip replacements multiple times over nicks a vein, and they can't get me enough blood in time to just bleed on the table. You just bleed out to death.
Okay.
Worst.
I usually try to take it further, like
Take it way further.
I do. I, as a group, it's fun to do this one as a group.
Really
quite frankly.
catastrophize.
Oh yeah, you get to the point where like your dog got run over because the physician was on the way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And you can watch the energy in the room just die.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the best thing that can happen? And I'm talking, we get it to the point where there's unicorns farting rainbows.
Right, yeah. So the farthest
So
end of
great,
both extremes.
right?
Perfect, okay.
So what is the most likely to have happened? And then they walk through. It's always somewhere in between. And then I diagram it and say, okay, what is in our control that can make
this
happen?
option to be the most likely.
The most likely
Yeah.
thing will happen. What can we do to control that as much as possible? And I've put this to test for people who assumed they were about to be deported.
Wow. Yeah. Just like talk about stressful.
I mean, their family,
Yeah.
they're just gone,
Yeah,
right?
everything over.
And I've walked them through this and watched them just say, like,
yeah.
if anything,
You give them like peace about it,
exactly,
at least, right?
Exactly.
Which is
Give them just the
alleviating
ability.
suffering in the moment, yeah.
Yep. So that one's a fun one. Real-time resilience, that one's kind of fun. I just stand up on the crowd and I expect these soldiers to just hammer on me as much as they possibly can. And as I'm, you're fat, you suck.
Right,
you know,
yeah. Try to like make them feel like trash, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm verbally walking them through how my brain is. Yes, I didn't do as well on my physical fitness test as I could have. I will train better next time. Yes, I can stand to lose a little bit of weight. Sure, just to give them the example of how that works, and then pair them up.
But behind the scenes of coping with things coming up suddenly, right?
Yep. And then how often do you, in your discussions with Laura, identify each other's character strengths? Verbalize each other's character strengths?
I think actually pretty frequently, but that's probably not common.
Probably. So that's another.
So we both go to therapy.
So often we overlook our own character strengths, and those that we're most intimate with.
Yeah.
I don't go to my friends and be like, it's kind of been a rough day. Can you share with me some of my character strengths?
Can you help me feel better?
Right?
Yeah. I think also with like conflict resolution, acknowledging each other's character, and not like you're bad at this thing, but being or maybe acknowledging your own like, hey, I'm so aware that this is a weakness of mine, and that when this is a weakness of mine, it affects you negatively, and I'm working on it not being a weakness or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like the opposite side of that coin. Yeah.
Very much so. And assertive communication. That's the next. These are actual steps. So we block off an hour per module or whatever throughout the year. So in every year we're going through all of these.
You go through the whole thing on like a
and that's as a National Guard unit. Active duty would be once a month.
Sure.
They pretty much cycle through these every month.
Right.
An effective praise and active constructing and responding. Kind of how do I identify the character strength, but then also say, hey, I'm really glad that you are.
Yeah.
You do this sort of thing, and it's amazing to me how the team cohesion, the takes away from the mundane and allows people to kind of go, oh, well, I am actually learning much more about myself than just my role as a soldier, my job, my place.
Yeah, you stop identifying with just what you do on like a really niche set.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So what was really neat about this organization and what they did in 2008 is they put out a global assessment tool. So the entire military, on a monthly basis, I believe, active duty wise, has to fill out basically a questionnaire of where are you in these core areas of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Rank them 1 to 10,
Sure.
1 to 10, whatever.
Sure.
Okay, so that your leaders can't see your specific answers, but they can see sort of where they can, like, okay, I really need to address this with my soldier.
Yeah.
But something that I didn't even think of for humanity in general.
Mm-hmm.
Think of what power having the feedback loop of positive psychology, how it has affected this large mass number of people.
Yeah. Yeah. How many people have
20
interfaced
years.
with the system after it's been put in place for an extended period of time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that data set allows us to then transform, okay, this is what we've learned through the military. How can we apply that again to the world?
Yeah.
How do we build resilience and flourishing within the entire world? So there were 6 comprehensive soldier and family fitness that I would every month sit down with my soldiers. Okay, we're in these areas.
Yeah.
You know,
Where are you at?
And it was so simple.
Like a little subjective scale, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Like
I would just hand it off. I'd say, fill this out, bring it back to me by the end of the day.
Yeah.
And they just take 5 minutes at some point throughout their workday, fill it out, hand it back to me. Cool. Now I have a piece of paper, and then they and I would schedule a time to go and sit down and talk one-on-one, and work through some of these techniques of resilience.
Yeah. This sounds like something I think people could use too, like if you're an employer or even, you've got
every team.
Right, yeah, you've got anybody that works for you or works with you, or even like family stuff, right? Like it seems like any kind of circumstance. It kind of reminds me, and this is like maybe the lower level version of this, but like Laura and I did the like love languages thing, and it's like it helps.
Love languages.
Yeah, right. And it's like you have like what you receive and then what you tend to give, and then it's like, okay, maybe there's a mismatch somewhere in like who gives what and who receives what, and then it's like, oh, I've been, I don't know, you talk to people and they're like, well, I've been giving them gifts, and they're like, why don't you love me? I'm like, I do love you, because gift giving is like their giving language, but it's not the other person's receiving language, or maybe they just need you to like sit down with them and give them a hug or whatever. And it seems like almost, useful in that same thing. And that's something that like, I'll even talk to my clients, right? Like, if they know what that is, or like what their Enneagram is, you like learn more about how people operate, and it helps. If I know that somebody's really motivated by you being like, hey, good job, then it's like, that is going to do better than if you're like, yeah, you've done a good job, or like you could do better at these other things. Right. Or, it's like maybe they need like a little bit of physical contact, and that makes them feel better about the thing than just saying it to them, or like maybe they need a gift, or maybe whatever it is, right? Like, yeah.
Well, identifying character strengths in a way is very similar to that in general. I'm not only am I going to actively use active communication to identify your character strengths as a human being, but I'm also going to then say, okay, what are some things that you would want to work on?
Yeah, communicate what I know
really
speaks to you. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I think how are we doing? I feel like I could sit here and talk for a really long time. We're probably coming kind of down to the end of like an episode length. Yep. So I think you've got some books that you brought with you. So I'd like to kind of ask people what they're reading, what they're watching or listening to, and then
what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to?
So we've got David Hofstadter.
Yep.
I know you
Douglas
talked about
Douglas Hofstadter. Yep.
Douglas
I'm a Strange
Hofstadter.
Yeah. If you want to just dissolve your ego, dissolve your sense of I, and the fact that I'm not going to give that part away, but what caused him to really dive into this.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. Flourish. This is the prior bestseller was Authentic Happiness. Same author. He's pretty much the developer of positive psychology theory, applied. The University of Pennsylvania, pretty much the only university that offers it. There's a private school in Georgia that offers it. There's 2 schools in London, 1 in Australia.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Oh, it's completely.
Yeah. Which is a shame, kind of, right?
Frustrating when you're trying to get your master's in it. And to not even have known that you could get a master's in what developed master resiliency training that I found so
seems like you deserve like an honorary master.
I know, I kind of, like, you're watching this.
What's that phenomenon where somebody, they're just like, you're an expert, you get a degree.
There you go, here's your piece of paper. That'd be wonderful. I think those are the two. Body keeps score. Becoming supernatural.
Yeah.
With
that one.
regards to brain and body and how it communicates with itself. YouTube for the meditation exercise.
Yes, we'll link that.
I think that's
about it. And then I think, you could go on for a long time
yeah,
probably. We'll link all of this stuff. And then kind of like to summarize with what strength means to you, and I think you could expand that definition. Like we've talked a lot about resiliency. So I think those are probably synonymous for a lot of people.
One of the things that is mentioned, strength to me is grit, quite frankly. Resiliency allows me to maintain grit, maintain that constant, no matter what, I'm going to
ability to like keep showing up,
keep doing it.
Yeah.
I think that if you don't show up, you can't get stronger. You can't, it's just so much that
it begets itself as well, right? It's a self-perpetuating loop.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I'm really excited.
It was my honor. I appreciate
share
it very
this
much.
and to link all of this information and to read Becoming Supernatural. It's
I'll send it to you.
awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.